Dave asked me to come out and talk, and I told him I'm not really the convention guru. I'm sure you'll hear more from James when he's here. Others in Alma about the convention. But what I'm focused on pretty much 24/7 is winning in November. How important it is here that we win our elections in November, elect all our candidates, including re-elect Rory Olson here as the judge, elect Sophia Manfred's judge. We have a long ballot here in Harris County. So when we talk about the fight we have here in Harris County, we have to recycle and what we're doing to win this year. And I'm confident with the way things are going, and if we do what we need to do, we can elect all our Republicans in Harris County from the top of the ballot to the bottom. We, just a little bit about Harris County, we are the third largest county in the country. We're the biggest battleground county. And by that I mean a county that goes back and forth. There are counties, bigger counties, where there's Chicago and Los Angeles, and they're solid Democrat. We're a county that actually goes back and forth, different elections, had for over 12 years. So we have a big fight here. And the scale of it is this: Harris County is over 4 million people and over 2 million voters. We expect to have 1 million voters this year in this election. And so it's a big challenge to win those fights. And when you've got an urban area like Houston, which is sort of decidedly leans Democrat, has for a long time, offset by a lot of the part of the county that's outside of Houston, and it's certainly more Republican and more conservative. It's constantly a fight to win our elections. So the biggest challenge we have in Harris County is that we have the longest ballot in the country. So we've got 2 judicial candidates here. There are 2 out of 75 that will be on your ballot this year. So it's critical that we elect all of them. The easiest way to do that is vote straight ticket. I hope a lot of y'all did that. A lot of Republicans don't want to do it. A lot of Democrats won't. So we have to have the challenge of getting enough people to vote straight ticket to come out to vote, and then also to convince those voters that for some reason don't want to do that to go all the way down the ballot, and to convince enough people not to vote straight Democrat. So it's a big education campaign we've got to get across to all of them. And so it's getting across the message, turning out our voters. There's something called the Lincoln Four-Step that Abraham Lincoln came up with 150 years ago. It's still the basis of all electoral politics. The 4 steps are: 1, get a list of your voters; 2nd, identify your supporters; 3rd, persuade the undecided to support you in election; 4th, at election time, turn out your support. That's all politics. So everything we do is aimed on those, going on those principles to win our support, persuade people, and then at election time, turn them out to vote. So I think things have been turning our way this past year. There are a lot of indicators that this so-called blue wave, which you may have heard about, is actually a ripple at best, maybe a swirl, ideally. And I think a couple of things I'll show you, but we're even seeing some of this nationally. I've got some charts here that are basically about the March primary, but we've had more indicators even the last couple of weeks that give us real strong, good signs of encouragement. I think we can we'll win this election, but it's always going to be a fight. So you may have heard during the primary in March that all these Democrats are turning out across the state. All these Democrats. Are you filming me? I keep moving around.
No, you can move around. That's fine.
All these Democrats were turning out to vote, and we're going to sweep over Texas. Well, in the end, statewide, I think 1 million Democrats turned out in the March primary, 1.5 million Republicans turned out. So we far outvoted them statewide. Even that, and interesting thing here in Harris County happened as well. Let me just show you this little chart I've got. And I'll just explain it, kind of, don't try to look at the numbers, but we compared the last 3 primaries for both parties in Harris County. Turnout goes on the bottom side is by day of early voting all the way up to election day, and for 3 different years. So typically, in a gubernatorial year like this year, the off year, our turnout is well below what it is in the presidential year. Oh, it's certainly below it. So presidential years expect to be more, and that's true. Now you may remember in 2008, Democrats still had a fight between Hillary Clinton and the Obama guy. They had 400,000 people turn out in their primary here in Harris County that year. They've never got anywhere close to that since. But in 2014, they had a pretty anemic turnout. It was only about about 55,000 people. We had 160 or so thousand, 140,000 rather turnout in 2014. That's pretty typical. And I'll talk about that in a second. It's one reason we can't just focus on primary voters because there's so few of them. They make up such a small part of the election. So we have to look at a lot of other factors looking at voters. But we were tracking it this year, and these red lines are this year. So if you can see this blue line on the Democrat side is what they did in 2016, the presidential year. The blue line over here is what we did in 2016. We had, by the way, 2016 primary, because the presidential primary was still alive, was easily the biggest turnout we've ever had in Harris County in a primary, 330,000 people. Well, the Democrats were on track all the way to early voting above that presidential year. This was pretty scary, that their people were that motivated that more than turnout in a non-off year than in the presidential year. What happened? On election day, they ran out of voters. They just fell off a cliff. They ended up above a gubernatorial year, typical gubernatorial year for them, but well below a presidential year. We ended up pretty much on track and slightly above where we've been in 2014. And think about this, it's kind of interesting. They had lots of primaries, far more than we did this year. We had very few major primaries, virtually no major statewide primaries to turn out our voters and get them excited. They had, they got into a runoff, and we were very happy to observe. Got into a runoff even for governor on their side. Sure. Got the answer to him. We know. So they had a lot of reasons to turn out, and we didn't particularly, as far as primaries go. But in the end, so Ted Cruz had made the comment, you may have already said, that the Democrats are going to crawl over broken glass to turn out. Well, a contingent of them did. Pretty much the very motivated Bernie voters. And we can't underestimate the fact that they've got a lot of enthusiasm among those voters this year. Hey, James, come on in. Take care, buddy. Stay chair. But on our side, what's interesting is we had our increase of voter turnout this year was over 10% higher than 2014, with virtually no major primaries. Our voting age population only went up about 4%. And we over 14, but our turnout went up 10%. So we had a lot more, our voters were excited too. And then we're seeing this across the country. So that was the encouraging thing. So even though our turnout ended up being about the same, Democrats are certainly more than an off year with all their primaries. We still have a very interested and motivated electorate. We just saw this in a couple of races last week. California just had a primary, and they said the Democrat turnout there was on par with a regular year for them. A lot of Republicans turned out. They even got a Republican in the runoff for governor of California. He's not going to win, but he's going to turn out Republicans down the ballot, and that's the key. We're going to get Republicans. The Republicans are motivated, not even in California, to put a Republican. They have this joint primary where the top two candidates run. So sometimes they just have two Democrats running against each other, like for the Senate. And so we actually got a Republican in that runoff through that primary system they had there. So we're seeing this around the country. Now, at the same time, the Democrats are motivated, but in their runoff they just had a couple of weeks ago, statewide, their turnout was the lowest it had been in a gubernatorial runoff in a century. Just sheer numbers, statewide for the Democrats. And fortunately for us, they nominated Lupe Valdez. Technically fortunate for Harris County, I think Andrew White was a sort of hometown boy, had a lot of support here. He is not going to be on the ballot. Lupe Valdez will from Dallas, and she's a particularly unexciting candidate even for Democrats. So we know Greg Abbott's going to win the governor's race, but the critical point is how can we work together? We want him to win it running away. We want him to carry Harris County again, as he did in 2014. And we need to be able to use that effect all the way down the ballot to elect all of our Republicans. So we're very encouraged by this. We looked down at some of the turnout, break it down a little bit more of what happened in Harris County. We looked at congressional districts. Now this is kind of interesting. Y'all know Dan Crenshaw? Ever heard of Dan Crenshaw? Just one group. We're going to buy all the eye patches we can this year. In the corner of the market on eye patches, he's an incredibly exciting candidate. Has had hundreds of people at the victory party. Is really exciting a lot of Republicans on our side. He ran in, obviously, came out of a 9-way race, ultimately won the runoff to succeed Ted Poe, who's retired from Congress. Look at the turnout here is interesting. The Democrats had a 5-way, I think it's 5-way primary. These are March numbers, turnout. A neighbor of mine who looks like a normal person, but is a typical liberal Democrat, who had a 4-by Hillary Clinton sign in his yard. My wife's here, she can attest to that. Nice guy, but very liberal. But he had a substantial amount of money, big volunteer base. In a 5-way primary, he won, but our turnout was still not quite double, but a good 70–80% higher than theirs in Congressional District 2, which is entirely within Harris County. Congressional District 7 is the other big battleground in Harris County this year. It's one of 23 districts in the country, one of 3 districts in Texas, that sent a Republican to Congress in 2016 but voted for Hillary Clinton. These are our Republicans who were reluctant to vote far top of the ticket. They wouldn't vote straight ticket. They would go vote third party, and they strayed away from the top of the ticket. But the Democrats have decided they want to retake the House of Representatives. So do we want to wake up in November with Nancy Pelosi as Speaker? Well, that's what they're setting out to do. And the only path they have to get there is to go after those 23 seats. In fact, that's what they need nationwide to flip them to Democrat. So John Culberson's district, which is a Republican district, is one of their major targets. They had 7 people running. They spent over the 2 top candidates, I believe, spent in March over $3 million. John Culberson had a nominal opponent in the primary. Wasn't a major primary, but it did have an opponent, but generally not a big campaign. Not a big reason to drive voters out the primary. And yet look what happened in Congressional District 7. We had 20% more voters turn out the Republican side than on the Democrat side. So they had a massive primary. Got some people to turn out, but again, in Congressional District 7, despite spending over $3 million with these 7 candidates running, more Republicans, 20% more Republicans turned out than Democrats. On the House State House side, for instance, Jim Murphy's district is in Memorial. Jim's one of our 11 state reps in Harris County. Didn't even have an opponent in the primary. That district was our highest turnout district in the county. So I think Republicans, particularly our traditional suburban Republicans, are fired up. They want to win, and they want to vote, make sure we keep Republicans in office. As you would expect, too, the Democrats' biggest turnout was in Sheila Jackson Lee's district. So they haven't grown their base significantly outside where it has been. But, not to underestimate any of this, there are certainly a contingent of Democrats that are fired up for turnouts this year, and they're going to get a lot of money in Harris County, I can tell you right now. But it's happening on our side as well. It's Congressional District 7. I'm not jumping ahead too much. I'll talk about this in a bit, but there's active campaigning on both sides, and there'll be a lot of money spent just in that race alone, national money. But I think we're going to get a lot of attention nationwide in Harris County this year. So we looked at who are these Democrat voters. What's this blue wave coming in of a lot of new people coming to vote for the Democrat primary, vote for the Democrat Party? So we looked at 2/3 of the people who voted, this is in March, of the Democrat primary, this is all Harris County. Those who voted the Democrat primary had never voted in the primary before, or just one. So they think, well, these are a bunch of new Democrats that they're getting. Well, one of the things we're able to do, I mentioned a minute ago, is we now use modeling we've done the last 4 years to look beyond. When we identify voters, we need to look beyond their primary history. Because when only 8 or 10% of the voters vote in a primary on each side, that leaves about 60% of, closer to 80%, but typically anywhere from 60 to 80% of the voters have no primary history. So we used to call them independent. Well, if that's 1.5 million voters, say, that's a lot of voters to go try to talk to as independents. We've got to use better information to identify who they are. So what we now use is a lot of modeling of who voters are. It's the same thing the RNC has used for years. It's what the Trump campaign used, what we've been using since 2014 to identify what people are, even if they don't go vote in the primary. It's not perfect, but it's pretty sophisticated. Computer modeling uses a lot of data. So looking at that, we knew already out of all these people that voted Democrat primary for a first or second time, 70% of them we knew were Democrats. They weren't turning out a lot of new voters. They were bringing people who were their November voters to get them voted in the primary as well. And actually, as far as new voters go, fewer than 4% had not voted before. That's about equal to the growth of the voting age population. So they weren't going to register a whole bunch of new voters and turning them out. They tried that, by the way, to like, what's her name? Wendy Davis, didn't work. They went out and registered all kinds of people who still didn't vote. We hadn't seen a big growth in Democrat registration. Now, how is this year different from last cycle? Well, a lot of different ways. Another reason to feel good about this year, optimistic if we do our job. We have, last year in 2016, we had the president on the ballot, and then we had one statewide race for railroad commission, and then after that it was local races. So this year we're very different. We'll have Ted Cruz at the top of the ticket. We'll have popular Republican congressmen in Republican districts on the ticket. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and of course Governor Abbott, a very popular voter with our voters, and a big cross section of voters. Midway down the ballot, we have Ed Emmett, county judge, who's also extremely popular here in Harris County. So we have a strong ticket to get a reason for people to vote Republican all the way down the ballot, in addition to our 75 judges who need to be elected. Now, this is some polling from a couple of months ago, in February. And this, I think this comes from the Texas Tribune survey. There was one also done by the Kinder area. Kinder's Institute, I'll show you in a minute. How do voters feel about Harris? Feel about right now? These are Harris County voters. They actually approved Donald Trump. A majority approved Donald Trump. Also, a great number feel that Texas is on the right track and not on the wrong track. They're feeling good about the way things are. They're not mad. Don't want to throw the thumbs out. They're in a pretty good mood. We've actually had specific surveys on Harvey. You might have heard of this, of Harvey? Harvey?
I'm still living upstairs.
Wait, I mean, a lot of, 11% of the homes in Harris County were flooded. We are, it's fascinating to me, we've been working with the governor's staff, and I'll talk about this in a minute, for over a year, and working on, knocking on doors, talking to voters, finding out what issues matter to them. The issues they had before were property tax reform, protecting police, getting jobs to veterans, and I think immigration reform. The biggest issue we were finding in that 52% was other. So we convinced them, let's add a flood control issue to the poll. We're doing that now because we know that's one thing the voters are telling us. I mean, we all lived through Harvey, and so how much important Harvey was in the flood. It's an issue that didn't exist pretty much a year ago, and obviously now it's the number one from so many people. But what we find is that the very favorable response to how the government formed federally, state, and especially locally dealing with Harvey, particularly the state and local response to it. People appreciate the need for what our leadership, what the Republican leadership did, responding to the storm. As far as judges, this was the Houston Bar Association, which did a survey this February. They're overwhelmingly, with the lawyers that actually practice in front of the judges, give much more favorable ratings to our Republican judges. We just had a survey we've seen done at the appellate level. Particularly, there are two appellate courts that include Houston, cover Houston. Generically, there are voters in those areas favor Republicans, which includes Harris County. Most 80% Harris County. Republican judges win in those surveys as well. So we're feeling our judiciary is well liked, Republican judiciary is well liked by the voters. Yes, the last thing, one of the last things to look at is voter registration. I talked about earlier. What we've looked at is where voters registry, we look at the state house districts, Republican house districts versus Democrat house districts. And just over, I think, the last 2 years, our increase in voter registration was 140,000, 50,000 more than the Democrats. So in the Republican areas, more people, a lot of people are moving in. In fact, one of our projects this summer I'll tell you about is we need to get all those people who move in here, we know are Republicans. We need to make sure they're registered to vote in November. This is an interesting one too. So the Kinder Institute now manages this Houston area survey that's been done for years by a professor at Rice. So even though he's liberal, at least he's consistent. And he's been doing this for years. And so if you look, this is from 2014 to 2018, how people identified in the survey, Democrat versus Republican. So you can see it trended up. So back in 2014, it was 42% Democrat, 35% Republican. 2016 was a high watermark for the Democrats. They were 52%. And we were down to 30%. But interestingly, since then, it's coming back to where it was in 2014. Pretty close. Democrats are 22 higher, we're 22 lower, but we're trending in the right direction. So we think we're about, as far as the way people are describing themselves, heading back to pretty close to where we were in 2014 in Harris County. So what does all this mean? We still need to get our vote out. We think, in working with State Standards Office, that we're going to have 1 million voters turn out this year. That's a big number for an off year. I'll give you an idea. In 2014, we had 700,000 people turn out. Presidential year, 2016, we had 1.3 million. So this is in between those two, about 1 million voters. So we need to reach a lot of people. And we model out who's going to turn out and how we can get them to turn out, how we get them to vote. And we come up with the most ambitious plan we've ever had in order to be able to do that. And we've been working with, over a year now, with the governor's campaign, who's going to have and I can tell you, Governor Abbott's going to have a very big campaign in Harris County for his reelection. But we've also been on the ground here with us for over a year. We have offices, they're working out of our offices, they're investing a lot in the ground game. I want to make sure everybody knows Caleb. Caleb, stand up. Caleb works out of our Northwest office. Now, he's a Harris County Republican Party field rep. Give him a hard hand. He works very hard. He's here for you. He's here to help support everything we're doing. Do we have any Abbott people working out of the Northwest office yet?
Oh, yeah. They've been there for months.
Yeah. So we're on the ground for months working, and that's what the Abbott campaign, the governor and I chatted recently, that's what his focus is now. We've seen what Obama could do with a lot of effort on the ground. We're doing the same thing on our side. And it's not just people knocking doors, recruiting volunteers, building forces. If you go to our block walks, you see all kinds of new people coming in, knocking on doors, telling voters how important it is to vote Republican, vote for the governor, vote the whole ticket. And that is the most effective message you can do, way to get your message out in politics. In 2008, and in 12, but particularly in 8, everybody heard about this great data-driven campaign that Barack Obama had. And they were very sophisticated and remain so. But even they said the gold standard of talking to voters, convincing voters, and getting them out to vote is face-to-face. There's nothing like knocking on a door and talking to a person to get them out to vote. So that's why we've invested so much effort on the ground across the county. That's happening in, I mentioned Congressional District 7. There's a huge focus there. Again, it's one of those targeted districts nationwide. Well, as a PAC, for instance, we can't coordinate with them legally, but it's a federal PAC that Paul Ryan helps fund that has had people on the ground since the beginning of the year. They said they're going to spend over $2.5 million in advertising for Congressional District 7 alone this fall. The Democrats have said they're going to dump $2 million into that district. So it's going to be a big battle, a huge fight to turn out our vote. And it's critically important to us. Congressional District 2 and 7 are completely within Harris County. And if we turn out the vote, a lot of Republicans there, and get them to vote all the way down the ballot, vote straight ticket, that can help carry the whole county forward. So that's one reason it's so important that we win those districts. So we've got a very ambitious campaign. We're also working with, of course, Governor Patrick's team, Ted Cruz's team, and County Judge Ed Emmett's team. And all we do, everything from on the ground, coordinating, messaging, polling, everything else, working together with them. One of these the parties know we started last year, but I have a full-time communications director. We're increasing this effort as we go forward, making everything we do and we communicate on social media, particularly with our growing presence there, tie into what we talk about in the campaign as well. So we meet with our candidates, hear the issues, get their information, work with the people across the county, and make sure we're getting our message out. We're working all summer. I went to recently reforming little micro networks of Republicans around the county. We started one in Oak Forest a couple weeks ago. A few weeks before that, we started one inside the Loop. I'd love to start one here. Well, you already have the Tea Party, but we things that the party can support. And I was at one formation in one group, and a person started and said, "Well, we're going to take the summer off." I said, no. We're not taking the summer. We can't take the summer off. So we're building all summer. We have a lot of programs coming. I'll talk about in a second. Our goals, again, we break the voters out into different groups. You know, some people, we just need to get them off the couch. Realize how important it is to vote this year, to vote straight ticket. Others, we have to, you know, kind of independents or other people that won't vote straight ticket. We need to convince them how important it is to vote for each one of these judges all the way down the ballot. And they have to get because they want to vote for Ed Emmett, a lot of them, and he's after most of the judges. So we get them to vote all the way down the ballot, and like all our Republicans. So what are we doing now? This is a message of takeaway, and it's what Caleb's here to get you. We can get help on everything we're doing. We are particularly working with activists, anybody that recruited trained volunteers, or we have house meetings and any kind of else to come to headquarters to support what you're doing. We want to continue to get more folks involved with the effort this year. We'll have phone banking. With the technology we have now, we even just use a phone bank using your cell phones. We can do, and we do door to door. We particularly all summer long, we're talking to voters. It's at phone banking. We're also calling mail ballot voters. This is interesting, you know, people that get their mail ballots and they don't vote them. So we always want to make sure as many people who want to get mail ballots get them. We're making those phone calls, doing the mail continually year round through the summer to make sure the voters, Republicans, get their mail ballots who are entitled to get them and want them. Block walking neighborhoods, doing countywide, we regular countywide block walks as well as neighborhood block walks all the time. I mentioned voter registration. We're rolling this out particularly this summer. This is, there's a new mover list, what we have the data on, regularly updated. It's people who have been Republican elsewhere in the country and have moved here. A lot of those people fleeing California, believe it or not, are Republicans. There's a reason they're fleeing California.
That's why they're smart
Who
enough
do
to
we
live.
contact in the office to get a movers list for our?
We'll get that right now. Caleb can help you on that. We're actually going to be having that disseminated by zip code, I think, an area. The best thing to do, this is a real rifle shot thing, but there's like 9,000 or 10,000 people right now. I think the state party mailing them. Okay. So they'll be mailing them. We'll be calling them as well and tracking who registers or not.
So I need to bug Caleb.
Yes. And you know, it's even a million voters turn out, sometimes these elections can be decided by thin margins. So making sure those new voters get registered can make a difference in a close election. One of the things I like to do is expose Democratic extremism, by the way. Go to Democratic candidate events. One thing we need to do, I think, for some of these Democrats to show just how extreme they are. I tell people, ask me Democrat, what baby would you not abort? What tax would you not raise? What gun would you not take? You know, because CD7 is an interesting one. The less radical woman won their runoff primary. They had a Bernie person who even the National Democrats didn't want to win. But the woman who won is still a favorite child of Planned Parenthood. She's very left-wing, and we just need to go to events and ask them questions and film them. So we need to show how left-wing they actually are. So yeah, if you do that, have opportunities to do that, do so. You can always use money, so feel free to donate anytime. It's an expensive campaign. I said we have the most ambitious campaign in the works this year we've ever had, and that means the most expensive one as well, because we're dealing with 1 million voters, but it's going to take a lot to reach all those voters to turn out. But I'm convinced with the climate, the way things are going, and everything we've got, the program we have, and think people are excited about this year. If we unite and work together, we can win the battle. So I think we will. So, look forward to working with you all, and thanks for having me here as well. Any questions? Or?
Yeah, I have questions. I'll start with one. What's your, do you have any data on the effectiveness of phone banking versus block walking? I think it's pretty obvious which is most effective, but which is time consuming.
Yeah, you know, good question, Dave. Off the top of my head, I don't remember. There's a book called Get Out the Vote that, in fact, Dave Carney, who runs, used to run Perry's campaign, runs Abbott's campaign, is a big believer in, and actually in there they have a chart of the numerical, where they've gone out and measured the difference. And I can't remember off the top of my head what it is. Block walking by far, door to door is the most effective. And then below that, I think a volunteer calling is probably the next. I always tell people, when you're talking to somebody knocking on the door, mention you're a volunteer, because otherwise they assume there's some paid call. But, I can answer that question for you. I don't have the top of my head, but there is a number that I can give you. Yes.
Quick question. So I just joined this teacher thing.
Which one?
Texas Educator somehow. I joined it because somebody asked me, you know, I've been speaking out against state testing and how it's too much for our students and whatnot, and how we need to get it way down and whatnot. So somebody introduced me to the group and I was like, okay, I'll check it out. Well, the only way to get into it is agree to block vote. So I agreed to block vote, got into one, and it claimed to be purple. But what I'm seeing is the more Democrat vote.
Then you got a question coming, right?
I do. So the big thing is that I'm seeing is the fact that they're rating these candidates as education friendly. But how do we get Republican candidates rated as education friendly, but they're really against Dan Patrick and whatnot? I've been kind of keeping silent in the background, just reading things and watching things and whatnot. So I'm trying to. I don't want to create too many waves to get kicked out of the group, but I also want to persuade. What would be your suggestion to get Republicans more?
That's an interesting question. I mean, if it's a genuinely neutral group and they just happen to have more Democrats in it, then recruit more Republicans to get into it. Now, some of them are just fronts. Some groups obviously just fronts for, you know, somebody who's absolutely opposed to, you know, private education accounts or the various alternatives, you know, to funding the vouchers or whatever. And clearly they're not going to be dissuaded. So I guess the other option is to show to be not really neutral. And that happens a lot. These groups come in and somebody takes them over, or they were always just set up to be a front. So I figure out that's my only idea. I'm sure other people have other ideas too. Either get more people in to swing them, which has happened to some groups, or just start your own group.
Teachers as a whole are leaning more Democrat.
Sure.
I've been in many debates with colleagues. So.
Yeah, you know what? I think the key there is Republicans would like to see more money get to the teachers, and I think that's the way the government, the education establishment runs. Is they get a lot more money, but it doesn't just trickles down to the teachers. And then there's the other whole problem of public education measured by input rather than output. You're going to look at actually the outcome. That's another longer story.
Can you send a memo or letter or a smoke signal or something to make sure that there's a voter registration card available in all the offices, all the field offices? Caleb's got them over there now, but I've been to 3 block walking events, and the last one I went to for Ted Cruz, I mean, I had to actually fight to get voter registration.
Caleb, can you pass that on? But I appreciate that. We'll pass that on. You're right. We should have
But
that.
all the offices need to have them, and every time there's a block walking event, can you? I suggest to make sure that every block walker has the voter registration cards available. I carry them with me. I found them to be pretty handy. But in the 3 block walking events, this last one they were, but before they weren't available.
Okay, I
I think all
appreciate
the
that.
offices.
Yeah, we'll do that. I'll pass that on. The other thing to do, by the way, they're regularly being offered deputy voter registrar classes. I know we just had one, right, in the Northwest office? And where you can become a voter registrar, so rather than just giving them the card, and hoping they mail it in, you can fill it out and turn it in yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure you got that. So,
And speaking on that, to get more of the long forms, the ones that you fill out for other people, I can't get them for you. After you take the class, you have to go to the HC tax office and get more of them yourself. I can only get the short forms, the ones that you hand out to people, and then they have to do it on their own.
I have to go to the tax office. I only got like 3 when I went to the class. They were giving me 3 or 4.
do they have branch offices?
Yes.
Let me go to the branch office.
I've got a handful of offices. I think there should be a list on the one in Tom. Okay. Let's share access to.
Hey, Paul, I remember hearing you talk about using data from the Abbott campaign quite often. Why don't I hear you talk about using Republican Party of Texas data? Is it?
We all share the same data.
Okay.
Yeah, it's ultimately one data pool.
Is it?
All about data trust. The one thing I think nobody shares is email addresses, but because nobody wants to share those. But we share. There's basically a voter file. All the information on that voter is shared by us, the Abbott campaign, the Cruz campaign, the RNC, RPT. We all have to. It's the
Other
same.
state committees?
Yeah, it's the same data ultimately that
All right.
we share together. So we access it different ways. You know, we can pull it up on Advantage primarily, or we can use it on the back end for mailing and everything else. But we're all sharing that same information. So it's
How about, what do you see as similarities and differences between your role and Chairman Dickey's role at a statewide level?
that's an interesting question.
There's a lot of similarities, I see.
Some similarities and some differences. I'm elected to the ballot boxes. You know, one thing I think, and he's been a county chair as well. I have to spend a lot of time learning about how our campaigns work across Harris County in a place with 4 million people. We have a lot of the same constituencies. I tell people I have 3 constituencies. It's the grassroots, it's the donors, and it's the elected officials and candidates. And the donors are the least demanding. But we have different, not all those interests don't exactly overlap. But we've got to try to get everybody to work together as well as we can. But it is similar. But obviously I'm a lot more granular. He's got a whole state. We've got 1 county. We're the biggest county by far in the state. But I think, so we handle campaigns and everything else at this level that the state party really doesn't do. So we coordinate with them.
Other questions?
And he can maybe have another spin on that too. I'm sure.
All right, thank you, Paul, appreciate that.